My parents heard about the divorce, clapped her hands and said, "Finally. We're getting rid of you. Pay for 3 years in my house." My answer made her shut up and turn pale. A few months later, we met again, and she asked me. It was a hot, sticky June day in Greensboro, North Carolina, and my mother had just made it clear that my pain was something to celebrate. I hadn't wanted to tell them in person, but guilt and obligation had a way of making you do irrational things, like driving 2 hours to the house you grew up in, just to hear your parents minimize your heartbreak. "Finally!" Sylvia exclaimed when I told them Bennett and I were divorcing. She actually clapped, the way some people might after hearing a good joke or that a relative got promoted. "We're getting rid of you." My father, Lowell, let out a breathy chuckle, barely glancing up from his iPad. He never had much to say unless it was about the stock market or the air pressure in his tires. Then came the kicker. "You still owe us," she said, almost in a sing-song tone. 3 years in our house after college. Rent-free, food on the table. That's not free, Isla." I just stared at her. My eyes must have gone glassy, but I didn't blink. "Mom," I said softly, "if I started listing the things you owe me for, you'd never speak again." The room went quiet. She froze. I could see the words forming behind her lips, but nothing came out. That moment, her stillness, was new. And for once, I didn't feel like the child in the room. I grabbed my bag, said I had a long drive home, and left. The door didn't slam, but I wished it had. Back in Raleigh, my townhouse felt like a sanctuary, even though it wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, old plumbing, and a neighbor who played country music a bit too loud, but it was mine. The silence didn't suffocate me the way it used to in the house with Bennett. It filled me up in a different way, gave me space to hear myself think again. After the divorce, I kept my last name. I didn't want the paperwork or the reminder. 15 years of trying to make something work that never really had legs. We weren't toxic, we just ran out of reasons to stay. I think we were both waiting for the other to pull the plug. There wasn't infidelity. No screaming matches. Just distance. Like 2 people renting the same space with different lives playing in parallel. We'd sit in the same room, scrolling through our phones, exchanging maybe 5 words a day. Eventually, you look up and realize you're living with a stranger who knows your middle name. When I moved out, I didn't take much. A couple of boxes, my paintings, some old cookbooks I never really used. Starting over at 39 wasn't something I had planned for, but once the shock faded, there was something strangely invigorating about it. I went back to painting. I started cooking for one. I took long walks without telling anyone where I was going. I let myself feel everything: shame, relief, grief, freedom. It was during this time that I also began unraveling my family's version of the truth. You see, I always thought Sylvia was cold because she was raised that way: distant parents, rigid rules, and the belief that vulnerability was weakness. But I started to realize that she wasn't just guarded. She was transactional. Love, for her, had to be earned. And I never felt like I'd paid enough. After college, I came back home, broke and burned out. I'd tried to find a job in publishing, and when that didn't work, I settled for retail until I figured things out. I lived in the spare bedroom. I did the cooking, cleaning, errands, basically became their third roommate. But in Sylvia's mind, I was a tenant. And tenants pay. Even after I left, that message stayed lodged in my brain like a splinter: "You owe us. For everything." But slowly, that belief began to decay. I started seeing a therapist. Her name was Monica, mid-50s, sharp-witted with kind eyes. She didn't let me wallow. Every time I said something negative about myself, she'd pause and ask, "Whose voice is that?" 9 times out of 10, it was my mother's. I didn't tell anyone else in the family about what had happened during that visit. Not my cousins, not my aunt, not even Bennett. It felt too humiliating. I told myself I needed time before I confronted her again. What I didn't expect was for that moment to come sooner than I was ready for. It was late November, the air crisp and sweet with chimney smoke. I was at a small artisan market in Chapel Hill, shopping for nothing, really. Just walking around with a latte and enjoying the sound of strangers laughing, families bickering over handmade wreaths, kids asking for kettle corn. Then I saw her. Sylvia. Holding a reusable shopping bag with her church group logo on it. Her walk was slower than I remembered, her posture less rigid. She was alone. She saw me at the same time I saw her. No chance to hide. No time to pretend I didn't notice. She walked up. No smile this time. No smugness. Just tired eyes. So, she said. Are you happy now? Her tone wasn't bitter. It wasn't kind, either. It was something in between. A space where regret lived but couldn't quite stretch out. I looked her straight in the eye and said, yes. For the first time in years. That was it. No grand speech. No tears. Just the truth. And it hit her. She looked at me like she didn't quite recognize who I was anymore. Or maybe, for the first time, she actually did. She nodded once and turned away. She didn't say goodbye. But she didn't need to. After that brief encounter in Chapel Hill, I felt something shift. Not in her. In me. I drove home that afternoon without music, without calling anyone, just listening to the hum of the road and the occasional soft rattle from the glove compartment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comforting. Like the absence of something toxic I'd been breathing in for too long. I didn't tell anyone that I saw her. There wasn't anything to say, really. It wasn't a dramatic confrontation, it wasn't a reconciliation. It was just a moment. But it was enough. The weeks that followed were quiet. The holidays came, and I spent them alone for the first time in my life. That was a decision I made early in the fall. I didn't want to sit through forced small talk over dry turkey and pretend everything was fine. I didn't want to watch Sylvia critique someone's green bean casserole while smiling through her teeth. I didn't want to fake laugh at Lowell's jokes that always circled back to someone being too sensitive these days. Instead, I stayed home. I bought myself a pre-cooked meal from a local deli and drank wine in sweatpants while watching old movies. I painted that day too, something abstract, dark blue with sharp edges. It looked like nothing but felt like everything. I didn't post about it. I didn't text anyone. I just let myself be alone without shame. By January, I'd started sleeping through the night again. That probably doesn't sound like a milestone to most people, but for me, it was huge. No more waking up at 3 a.m. with my heart pounding, spiraling about what I could have done differently. No more checking my phone hoping for some sign from Bennett, or worse, from my parents. I finally deleted his number. Not in anger, but because I didn't need it anymore. Then, in mid-February, something strange happened. A letter arrived. Not an email. Not a text. An actual, handwritten letter in a cream-colored envelope with my name in slightly shaky cursive on the front. There was no return address, but I knew that handwriting as well as I knew my own. Sylvia. I sat at my kitchen table for over an hour before I opened it. My hands trembled a little, and for a brief moment, I thought about throwing it away. But curiosity, or maybe hope, won out. Inside, there was a single page. No Dear Isla. No closing. Just her words, neat and controlled as always. I don't know if I understand the choices you've made. I suppose you were always braver than I gave you credit for. I've been thinking about that. About how much I dismissed. About how much I chose not to see. I never had the tools. That's not an excuse. But I see now that I expected you to be grateful for things that were never gifts. And that maybe you didn't owe me anything. I don't know what kind of mother I was to you. But I'm beginning to understand what kind of daughter you are. And that matters. That was it. No apology. But something that felt adjacent to one. I reread it 3 times, waiting to feel something sharp: anger, grief, relief. But I felt tired. Like I'd just come in from a long walk uphill and could finally sit down. I didn't write back. Not yet. I wasn't sure what I'd even say. Instead, I folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box in my closet, the same one where I kept old photos, a few of Bennett's notes, and a Polaroid of me and my best friend from college that still made me laugh. I kept living. I kept healing. I started attending a weekly art group downtown, a small circle of women who met every Thursday evening in the back room of a community center. We'd paint, sketch, sip tea, and sometimes talk about the heavy stuff. Sometimes not. There was no pressure to be inspiring or resilient. We were just allowed to exist in whatever state we arrived in. There was one woman there, Maeve, probably in her early 50s. Soft voice, wild silver curls, and a laugh that filled the whole room when she let it. She reminded me of everything I had wanted my mother to be. One night, after most of the group had left, I mentioned the letter. Not in detail, just that my mother had sent something that surprised me. Maeve didn't ask for more. She just nodded and said, "Sometimes people are only capable of showing up when they think they're about to lose you. Doesn't mean it's too late. Doesn't mean it's not." That stuck with me. Because that's what Sylvia had done. She hadn't written when I left Bennett. Not when I packed up my life, not when I stopped coming to family dinners. But after I looked her in the eye and said I was happy, truly happy, without them. She blinked. That blink was her version of panic. But still, I didn't rush back. I didn't reach out. I didn't fall into the trap of needing to fix what someone else had broken. It wasn't my job to repair their idea of me. Weeks passed. Spring began to stretch its arms again, and the air carried that earthy, green smell I loved. One Sunday, while walking through the arboretum, I saw Lowell. Alone. He was sitting on a bench with a takeaway coffee, watching a group of kids run by. I almost didn't recognize him without his usual frown. There was something softer about him, though the lines on his face had deepened. He looked up. Saw me. I froze for a moment. Then gave a nod. Not a smile. Just acknowledgement. He returned it, and for a second, I thought that would be it. But he stood up and slowly walked over. "Been a while," he said. I waited. He cleared his throat. "Your mother wrote to you. Said you never responded." "I know," I said. He shifted his weight. "She meant well. She always does." I bit my tongue. There were so many versions of that statement I could have unraveled. But I didn't. Instead, I said, "Maybe. But that's not always enough." He looked at me, and for once, didn't argue. There was a silence between us, not heavy, just unfamiliar. Like two people who used to live in the same house but spoke different languages the whole time. "I'll be around," he said, finally. "If you ever want to talk." I nodded. And then I walked away. No drama. No shouting. Just distance, and something like understanding. But the real confrontation. It hadn't happened yet. Sylvia would reach out again. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. 2 weeks later, the second letter arrived. Same cream-colored envelope, same delicate handwriting. This one had a return address, something that struck me more than anything else. She wanted a response. I let it sit on the counter for a few days. It wasn't fear holding me back. It was the knowledge that once I opened it, the next phase would begin. And I wasn't sure I was done being in the space before it. The space where I had control of the narrative, where I didn't have to decide what kind of daughter I still wanted to be. Eventually, one evening after cleaning the apartment, I made tea and sat down at the table. The light outside had turned that soft gold of early dusk. I opened the envelope. I know the last time we saw each other, I wasn't kind. I also know it wasn't the first time. I'm writing again because I'm not good at phone calls and because I think I'd ruin it if I tried to say these words out loud. Your father told me he saw you. He said you looked different. Lighter. I suppose it made me feel both proud and ashamed. I didn't raise you to need me, and now I'm realizing how badly I wanted to be needed, just not in the way that felt like work. I've been remembering little things lately. You were at the kitchen table with your sketchpad, always focused, always so quiet. I used to think you were distant. But now I think you were just protecting something I didn't know how to understand. Would you consider seeing me? Just to talk. No expectations. No rehashing. I just want to sit across from you and know that I tried. There was a postscript, just a single line, I'll be at Haywood's Cafe on Saturday at 11, in case you feel like saying yes. It was strange, the way my chest tightened. Don't panic. Not anger. Something closer to nostalgia mixed with dread. Haywood's Cafe was 10 minutes from where I lived. It was a quiet place with mismatched chairs and chalkboard menus. I used to go there with Bennett sometimes, when things were still good. I hadn't been back since the split. Saturday came quicker than I expected. I told myself I wasn't going to go. That I'd spend the morning painting or cleaning the fridge or doing anything but sitting across from my mother. And yet, at 10:47 a.m., I was pulling into the gravel lot behind the cafe. When I walked in, she was already there. Hair neatly pulled back, pearl earrings, reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't look up right away. But when she did, she stood up, like she wasn't sure if she should hug me or just acknowledge me like a stranger. I didn't hug her. I sat down, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked smaller somehow, like the years had finally started peeling away that armor she always wore. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said softly. I wasn't either, I replied. She nodded like she deserved that. Maybe she did. The conversation that followed was not groundbreaking. She asked about my work. I told her a little about the art group. She said she'd been volunteering at the church more, and that Lowell had joined a walking club. We spoke like people who hadn't known each other in decades. But then, after our food came, she lowered her fork and looked at me in a way that caught me off guard. I didn't want a daughter who needed me, she said. Because I didn't know how to give anything I didn't have. But I think you needed me anyway. I didn't answer. Because she wasn't wrong. I was angry with you after you left Bennett, she continued. Not because I thought you failed. But because I didn't know what to do with the version of you that wasn't broken. I only ever knew how to comfort weakness. I didn't know how to support my strength. That stunned me more than any insult she'd ever thrown my way. I still didn't say much. I let her talk. For the first time, she didn't fill the space with critiques or small jabs or reminders of what I should be grateful for. She just talked. About herself. About me. About how her mother had never told her she was good at anything, and how she swore she'd be different, only to become her anyway. I think I resented you for not needing me the way I needed her, she said. But I see now that you were building your life around the scraps I gave you. And you made something beautiful. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the emotion that hit me was calmer than tears. It was like watching a dam give way slowly, not all at once. Do you want a relationship with me? She finally asked. It wasn't dramatic. Just human. I thought about it for a moment. I don't know, I said honestly. But I'm open to trying. Slowly. With boundaries. She nodded again. I can do that. I want to do that. That was it. We sat there for another hour, mostly in silence. She paid the bill. We walked to our cars without touching each other. And still, I wasn't ready to let her back in fully. Later that evening, I got a text from Lowell. It just said, she's been different since you spoke. Quieter. Calmer. I think it matters more than she let on. I didn't reply. I needed space to breathe. But part of me, a small, cautious part, started believing that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Or at the very least, make the effort. Even if it took them a lifetime to start. The following week, I didn't reach out. It wasn't meant to be a test. I just needed to sit with what had happened at the cafe and let the reality of it settle. I hadn't planned to forgive, and I still hadn't. What Sylvia gave me wasn't closure. It was an opening, and that's an entirely different thing. Openings take time. They require patience, and trust doesn't grow overnight, especially not where it had never existed before. Then one morning, I was leaving my apartment when I saw a small package at my door. No postage, just my name written in thick black ink. Inside was a small sketchbook, hardcover, leather-bound, the kind that artists like me can never have too many of. Tucked into the first page was a note, written in her familiar pen. I remember how much you used to draw. I don't know if you still do. But I saw this in a shop and thought of you. No strings. Just something I thought you might like. S. No emotional manipulation. No guilt trip. Just a gesture. It startled me more than anything else she could have said. I brought the sketchbook to the art group that night and didn't tell anyone where it came from. I wasn't ready to share that yet. It felt fragile. Like speaking it aloud would crack whatever strange, cautious bridge was beginning to form between me and my mother. Weeks passed, and the correspondence between us grew. Nothing heavy. She would sometimes text an article she thought I'd like or send a picture of a new dish she tried to cook. I responded when I felt like it. Sometimes with one-word answers, sometimes with full replies. The rhythm wasn't forced, which was the only reason I let it continue. Then one day, Lowell called. Not texted, called. I nearly didn't answer. "Hey, Isla," he said, his voice stiff but not cold. "Hi, Dad," I said, surprised by how neutral I sounded. "I was wondering if you'd want to come by the house sometime." I hesitated. "No expectations," he added quickly. "I just figured. It's been a long time. Thought maybe we could talk." "What about?" There was a pause. "Your mother's been different. I think seeing you, hearing what you said, made her think more than anything I've ever told her. And me too, if I'm being honest. It was the first time I'd ever heard my father say anything resembling introspection." "All right," I said slowly. "Maybe. I'll let you know." I didn't commit to a date. Just the idea. The idea was enough to sit with for a while. In the meantime, I kept living. My job at the community college became more fulfilling with every passing month. I had a few students who reminded me of myself at 20, sharp but uncertain, talented but apologetic for it. I poured energy into helping them find their voices, not just their technique. Art became less about expression and more about excavation. Digging into things I hadn't known were buried. I painted scenes from memory now, not always literal, but emotional landscapes. The hallway of my childhood home with two bright lights. The feeling of being watched in silence at dinner. The way a slammed door could echo for hours. My therapist, Monica, told me once that children of emotionally distant parents often grow up afraid of ambiguity. We crave clarity. We want to know exactly where we stand because we've spent too long guessing. That conversation stuck with me. So, I stopped guessing. I started asking. When I next texted Sylvia, I didn't keep it casual. I asked her plainly, "What are you hoping for with me?" Honestly. She didn't reply right away. But later that evening, I got a message that said, "I don't know yet. But I'm willing to earn whatever you're willing to give. Even if it's just civility." It wasn't flowery. It wasn't an emotional outpouring. But it was enough. And so, one Saturday in early spring, I drove back to Greensboro. The house looked the same. The lawn, still immaculately trimmed by Lowell's standards. The shutters are freshly painted. But there was something softer about it, or maybe I was looking at it through a different lens now. Sylvia met me at the door. She didn't reach for a hug, but she did smile, nervously. It was the most human expression I'd seen on her face in years. Lowell was in the kitchen, pouring sweet tea. He looked up and gave a short wave. There she is. The house felt smaller somehow. Less intimidating. I took a seat on the same couch where I'd once sat, freshly out of grad school, hoping someone would ask how I was doing. No one back then. This time, they did. The conversation wasn't groundbreaking. We talked about work. The weather. My apartment. Sylvia told me she'd started a beginner's watercolor class at the local library, and I nearly choked on my tea. Really? I said, raising a brow. She shrugged. It's harder than it looks. But I like the mess of it. The unpredictability. That sentence alone could have been a metaphor for her entire life, if she realized it. Later, as I was getting ready to leave, Lowell pulled me aside. You know, when you were little, you used to hide under the porch whenever we argued, he said quietly. I'd pretend not to notice, but I always saw your shoes sticking out. I froze, unsure where he was going with it. I think about that sometimes. How we made the house look solid, but it had cracks in all the wrong places. It was the closest he'd ever come to an apology. I didn't forgive him at that moment. But I looked at him and said, I know. And he nodded, like that was more than he'd hoped for. As I drove back home, I realized that this, whatever this was, wasn't healing the way people talk about it online. It wasn't tidy. It wasn't satisfying in the way that some reconciliation stories are. But it was something else, real. It was two imperfect people, three, really, trying, for once, to meet each other somewhere in the middle. And for the first time, I wasn't walking away from my family. I was deciding how much space to give them. On my terms. In my time. I returned from that visit feeling level. Not overjoyed. Not anxious. Just clear-headed. I'd gone to that house bracing for something to fall apart. But nothing did. And maybe that was the most shocking part. No screaming. No blame. Just two people who had finally realized they couldn't keep pretending their daughter hadn't changed, and that maybe, they had to start changing too. Still, I kept my distance. We didn't talk every week, and when we did, it was short, intentional. I let go of the fantasy of ever having the kind of parents I'd admired in my friends' families, the ones who knew how to show love in the right language, not coded in backhanded compliments or layered with conditions. But I also didn't want to carry around a lifetime of bitterness. I was done dragging that weight behind me. Then came the letter from the lawyer. Not mine. Sylvia's. It was a formal notice about the estate planning updates Sylvia and Lowell had made. Apparently, they were moving some things into a trust. The letter said I had been listed as a co-trustee, along with a distant cousin I barely remembered, to ensure impartiality and fairness. I blinked at the papers. I hadn't asked for this. I didn't even know they had an estate big enough to involve a trust. But there it was, in black and white. Language about assets, properties, investments. And then, near the bottom, a handwritten note on a sticky tab, "This is our way of showing trust, Isla. And responsibility. We know we didn't show either when you needed us most." It took me days to process. Not because I wanted the money, but because it confirmed something I had long suspected but never said aloud: they had it to give. They always had. The 3 years after grad school? The guilt Sylvia laid on me? The "you owe us for everything" speech? All of it was built on sand. They weren't struggling back then. They were comfortable. Secure. And still, she'd looked me in the face, clapped at my divorce, and told me I was a burden. For weeks after, I did nothing. I didn't sign anything. I didn't call. I stewed in the quiet heat of it, trying to decide what I wanted to do with this knowledge. Then I made a plan. It wasn't revenge in the dramatic, scorched earth sense. No, that wasn't my style. I didn't want pain. I wanted clarity. And I wanted to make a point they couldn't ignore. I called Sylvia. I'd like to propose a different arrangement, I said calmly. You're not comfortable being a co-trustee? She asked. No, I said. I'm fine with that. But I want to allocate my portion differently. Silence on the other end. To what? There's a local foundation I've been working with. They offer grants to adult women re-entering college after trauma or family estrangement. I want my share of the trust, whenever that day comes, to go directly into a fund that supports that program. More silence. You're giving it away? She asked, stunned. Yes. Every cent. I don't need it. And I don't want it. Not because I'm angry. But because someone out there needs it more than I ever did. The silence was longer this time. I just wanted you to be okay, she said finally. And I am, I replied. But I became okay in spite of everything. Not because of it. And that matters. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. And that, I think, is what really rattled her. 2 days later, Lowell called. You're sure? He asked, no judgment in his tone. Just curiosity. I'm sure. Well, he said, your mother's been quiet since you told her. I think she's trying to understand what this means. It means I'm free, I said. And that was the truth. The months that followed were different. Sylvia didn't pull away, which I expected. If anything, she became more tentative. She asked questions instead of making statements. She showed up without demands. She tried, in her way, to connect. And I let her. With boundaries. On my terms. But she also knew now, without doubt, that her control was gone. The trust was updated. The grant program received its first funding notice from my future share, and the foundation director called me in tears. They would be able to support 7 women this year alone. 7 women who had been told, like me, that they owed someone for surviving. I didn't need Sylvia or Lowell to applaud it. Their silence was enough applause. I didn't need forgiveness or redemption. What I needed was to know that I had taken their legacy, their money, their name, their power, and turned it into something they never thought to do: help people without asking for anything in return. That, to me, was the sweetest form of revenge. No screaming. No estrangement. Just peace. Just purpose. Just a daughter, finally free.